everybody. Welcome to DevOps Decrypted, where we talk all things DevOps. I'm your host, Laura Larimore. I'm here with our Adaptavist panel. We have Rasmus, Jobin, Matt, and John here today. Quickly of note, we'd like to ask you to leave us some feedback at devopsdecrypted at adaptavist.com. That's where you can email your feedback for us. We're going to kick off today with some DevOps in the news. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the backdoor that's planted by the XZ Utils open source project. So Rasmus, you want to kick us off with that a little bit? Give us a little overview of what's going on there.
Sure. As the resident open source nerd and enthusiast, I'm well hooked into these kinds of things and have been reading about it a lot. It's a deep thing. I encourage anybody with a curiosity to look into it more, because we don't really need to talk about what XZ does, because this is more about the social engineering about, open source products. And there's this famous XKCD comic about how the internet is this beautiful superstructure built on top of a bunch of things. But there's this one little teeny tiny thing in the lower right corner that's just thanklessly maintained by some guy in Kansas or whatnot for who knows how many years. And in this case, XZ was kind of like that. And there was just this one stressed maintainer, I can again relate there. And over time, somebody wormed their way in that looked like a person, but they were really probably a state actor of some sort. And they managed to obfuscate and disable some checks and put something in that you couldn't tell was actually a sneaky backdoor about SSH, which could give attackers access to a wider range of servers because it got into Linux distros and so on. And it really
use XZ. XZ? Should I be saying XZ for those of you on the other side of the pond?
I have no idea. Zebra? It's a strike force,
But what is it? So it's a compression utility, right?
Yeah. And again,
it like zip up files and it squidges things really, really small. What I don't quite get is how it's so core to so many things and so many people's infrastructures. Is there like libraries that's like deeply embedded into like Linux? Is that how it works, Rasmus?
It's really it. It's like, unlike something like Windows, where everything is written by Microsoft and it's just in this big giant code base somewhere. With Linux in general, it's been put together by hundreds and thousands of people just over years, and there are all these little itty-bitty pieces, like file system approaches you've never heard of. Like, well, it's in there. So there's all this kind of stale or semi-stale or not necessarily very well maintaining stuff in there. And attackers are beginning to realize, if we could sneak in there and plant an unrelated backdoor, even though like it's a compression utility, how do you attack something through a compression utility? Well, when it has a sneaky sneaker that goes in and interacts with SSH through some other issue, well, then you start being able to work out an attack vector there. So it's crazy.
And it is definitely an easy way to get into the system, right? This actually reminds me of one of those episodes where we discussed in detail about SBOMs, the software bills of material. The main reason SBOMs became so popular these days is, you need to know exactly what is embedded in your systems and, what kind of utilities we're using, what libraries we're using, and, who wrote it, and obviously do the scanning and figure out all the details about those libraries. I think, if there is one takeaway again from this whole situation is, make use of SBOMs, know what you're embedding in your application. I mean, obviously nobody suspects Linux, so this is the next level. What if they get into the operating system? But I think there's a lesson for us to take away from this as well. We need to be careful with all the applications we are developing, the products that we are developing as well.
Yeah, and this does get into licensing, which is a good next topic, because the social engineering angle in this is just like spot on. Because I have been that stressed open source maintainer. I have had weirdos show up for my projects and like contribute code that's like, what is this? Like, well, I thought this would be useful. Okay, maybe. But there have been times when I have been desperate for more contributors and would even let in kind of like poor quality code just to activate more contributors, just to get help, just to get people to work with me. But what's a better way? Because that's what we keep hitting on these other topics about HashiCorp and now Redis and all that. Like, what is a sustainable open source mode that doesn't rely on a bunch of stressed out maintainers like me when I'm wearing my open source nerd hat?
this is like the tragedy of the successful projects, I guess, isn't it? Because, like, I mean, to my discredit, I've not really been very much involved in doing open source stuff since literally the 1990s, where I had all sorts of fun. It was very kind of a fundamental part of like building my career when I was messing around with Unix utilities, like back in the late 1990s. And you always found some sage-like guru type person at the top of the tree evaluating pull requests. Or it wasn't using pull requests back in the day. It was like patch files, etc. And anything grows, and then you say, well, you take this thing on. It's like, well, you seem to know a bit more about testing than I do. I'm going to focus on the core functionality of this thing. So you take care of that, and then you get this balkanized responsibility for checking things that are submitted, merging them. Is it even a tragedy of the commons? I'm not sure if that's the right analogy. Something like that. Surely this would be much better if things weren't open source, right, Rasmus?
Yeah, okay. And here's the fun part, because plenty of people say the solution is just pour money at open source maintainers. And I have a weird response to that. No, that's not at all it. My open source organization actually had money, and we couldn't use it because you still have to review code, and you still have to have people motivated by money, but then they might not be motivated to actually work on the project for the sake of the project, which is really kind of like the spirit of open source. So if you can't fix it by pouring money at open source contributors, or necessarily just like hand out developers, like, here's a developer, you go work on this thing over here on your own time for a little bit. That doesn't necessarily fix the issue. It helps, it adds more activity, but it doesn't fix it. And I have like a sneaky like side tangent hope for the venue project that I'm working on these days, because some of the concepts have grown out of my struggles over the years as an open source maintainer, in that I wish this was easier. I wish it was easier to keep people organized. I wish it was easier to make things visible so that you could see these things. The things that happened with XZ was some super sneaky like automated test that used a binary file. Like, it was obfuscated off to the side. That's why it nearly made it. But what if there was just like a best practice for unit testing? Like, everything was just beautifully laid out for you. Just plug these things in and you're good. And then you're hooked up to CVEs and all these things that, scan things for you. And you can trust in this kind of like foundation system that makes things really easy for you, as opposed to it's a guy in his garden shed trying to make this thing work with, old calculator computers. It's just like,
I mean, I like your idea about unit testing everything, but who takes ownership of testing the underlying operating system, right? I mean, we don't even have time to test the products that we develop, the applications that we work on. So how much visibility are we getting into this underlying infrastructure or the operating system itself, right? So who takes ownership of these libraries that they're using in the Linux?
That's kind of a really interesting part of this, because this is a small little library, the things there, and then maybe the other two things that might be in the news at the moment are kind of like HashiCorp and Valkey and Redis, and those are two completely different, like it's sort of in terms of scale and things. But you both paint them both with like the open source brush, right? And there's one is about business models. So with HashiCorp and Redis, and being able to make money from open source, and these small libraries that just underpin how everything works. I think that's that's kind of a completely different things. It's just reminded of Max Howell from Homebrew has put together this the T protocol. T.xyz, which is about like trying to reward project contribution. So about rewarding like community and things as a project gets popular. So I find that's a fascinating initiative to drive that a little bit. I hope it's successful, but at the moment, a lot of the sort of small scale open source is a lot based on hope and goodwill.
And he said the right thing to do. I mean, I'm probably going to say a controversial opinion, and Rasmus probably wouldn't talk to me after this. But HashiCorp, I mean, can you actually blame them trying to make money off it? Because they actually own the column, they're maintaining it, they're making sure that there are no CVEs coming or no backdoor entries happening there. We as a company, do we really rely on individual contributors who can likely plant these backdoor entries, or do we rely on companies like HashiCorp and maybe pay them some bucks so we are sure that they're giving us secure software?
Yep, I think a big thing here is whether you get into bait and switch situations or not. That's what upsets me. Like, proprietary source code doesn't upset me. Like, Windows is proprietary and it's relatively a good product. But if HashiCorp had started out the way they did and said we are a proprietary commercial product, I would have no problem with them. It was that whole like building their product and their community on open source and volunteerism and all this good happy time stuff, and then like, oh, by the way, now it costs money. That's my big problem with these things. I suspect, and I'll bring up an example from my open source project a long time ago where somebody tried to contribute something which I found interesting. We were trying to adopt semantic versioning, which is one of these things that can help you make it more visible whether a version of a thing is going to have a bigger impact or a smaller impact. And we got into thinking about, well, if we make individual developers try to determine just like on the fly whether a pull request is a major, minor, or patch release, it would become a complete and utter mess. So what can we do that kind of like automates this process? And we got into thinking about, well, you could kind of deduce this by just looking at a method signature. Like, is this actually a major or minor, and so on? At which point you take that away, the responsibility of figuring out whether something is really the thing, and you just like make a computer do it, make a robot do it. And at the chagrin of Matt being here and loving AI, I suspect AI is going to end up playing a big role in this, to take away some of this monotony, and you just leave the humans there to figure out, okay, what is it we want to do? And then like just make me the base foundation, and then we will add the little pieces on top of it.
So the TLDR on the XZ, I think, is it's just shining a light on things that's probably been bubbling under for a while, right? And
that's not the only one.
We should see some less of these scary things. We haven't had a like really scary exploit for a while, so I guess we're due one, perhaps.
Yep, and other projects are not now suddenly realizing, wait a minute, this person over here contributing weird things. It's like,
I think that's a good thing, even if it will keep me awake tonight.
Yep. So I wonder if this kind of foundation relates to anything with infra from code. Does anybody want to highlight what that is, what that means, how it's different as infrastructure as code?
I'm probably the big kind of infra from code fan. Like, not unless I think there's the so I kind of my sort of software engineering background goes like, I don't really want to deal with infrastructure. Like, I just want enough infrastructure provisioned in order to be able to run my application. And there's like that's what we that's what we want. So if there's something that can deduce what's necessary to run my code and provision that, then I'm all for that. So that's the kind of the basis of infra from code. But I've yet to see a really good implementation of it that doesn't introduce a brand new programming language that isn't general purpose, and it doesn't require you to do a whole rewrite of all your stuff. So so that's the background and those things. Rasmus, what's in the news about it?
Well, it's news to me just because I don't know all the things, surprisingly, that there's this not new, but new thing called Wing that's trying to do infra from code, and just you just write your code and this magical infrastructure will appear, which I would love if that was the reality of things. Although for me, it's kind of like security. I don't want to think about security. Just do it for me. Just magically make security appear, which is kind of what I was talking about earlier. I wish all these things would just happen in the background as I pick a framework and start. Whether this Winglang thing would do that, I don't know. I posted it on our Slack and got some mixed responses.
it is an interesting prospect for sure, because with all these different cloud providers coming up, AWS, Google Cloud, even on-prem, right? I mean, I don't want to be sitting there and writing different code for different cloud providers and stuff like that. I mean, definitely not. It's difficult because everybody uses different services, and if there is a way to abstract it all, and looks like that's what infra from code is doing, right? You write one piece of code and you just hook it to different cloud providers and it will magically work. Am I getting the wrong impression here, or is that how it is supposed to work?
Yeah, I mean that's how it's supposed to work. You declare your app and if you run something over it and boom, it sort of arrives. So amped, like getamped.com is that's the best implementation I've seen of this from things there, but it's very specific to AWS, and it supports only a sort of a small number of libraries and things. So you have to kind of build in a way that's sympathetic in the way, but it isn't. It is just JavaScript, and you can run Node. So for me, this is like the best so far of where we're at. In terms of like just being a general programming language and it working.
Let me clarify for the listeners. So when you say infra from code, we are writing code for our application, not for the infrastructure itself. And it is actually going through a code, detecting what kind of infrastructure our application would need, and then bring up that infrastructure wherever we need, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you write so like you're writing Node code, you write an Express backend. It knows you can go through and it will pull out the endpoints, create a gateway for it, or all of the various whatever target you have. It goes and creates those things. You're not having to write anything which explicitly says I need an API gateway. I need this, that, and the other.
So no more writing Terraform, no more writing CloudFormation, none of that.
That's the dream. Yeah,
that's a dream. I like it.
YAML.
So is this like an evolution from infra as code? So going from infra as code where a load of cloud engineers would write Terraform or write CloudFormation or Pulumi or whatever, and putting this entirely in the hands of the developers to bring up all their infrastructure? Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's the dream. And it sounds scary, doesn't it?
It's kind of funny because I came onto this recording not thinking I'd mentioned Venue once, let alone twice, but it feels like this is kind of what we're trying to do with Venue, but it's not infra from code. It's kind of just like old-fashioned automated infra as code, in that you log into a thing, you say, I want to work on a Node app, click button, okay, fill in some parameters, and then magic happens. And then because it runs through Jenkins and SonarQube and Nexus and gets deployed to Kubernetes and all these magic things in the background as part of the platform, it's kind of the same thing. Just amps us from code to fully managed AWS workloads in seconds. Yeah, I got that button.
Yeah, because it's the same thing happening.
It is. I would say the user experience is the same, although you have behind the scenes, you have your Terraform code and CloudFormation doing the stuff for you. In this particular case, that's not the case anymore. There's no Terraform code. There's nothing sitting underneath. But yes, for the user, absolutely. Yeah, you have a platform. You're clicking the button in both cases.
Well, I think you need to just think of a level of abstraction higher, right? So
yeah.
If with kind of most of the solution at the moment, you're like, I have a Node app and I have a MySQL database and I need a queue. So from something, the infra from code sort of things there just goes, I have storage, so I need to read and write SQL stuff. I have a queue I want to read and write to, and I don't want to specify what they are or how to interact with them, except through my API calls in my code. And I don't even want to know what the implementation is under which products I'm using or whatever. It just sort of does it. So that is that level above.
But it is somewhere. My understanding from Winglang is that while you do write just plain generic code and it's agnostic, when you run some step, it actually does generate some Terraform code on the fly that goes and deploys to AWS and whatever it is. And likewise with venues, yep, here's a template. It just contains the code you want to write and do things, But then when you let it run, somewhere behind the scenes, there's a bunch of nerds like me and like wizards that do magic things to your cloud, infrastructure and just magics it up. So still
As a developer here, I appreciate the magic people that are back there, like Rasmus. So yeah, that sounds really cool. I think that kind of goes into, so if you're looking at, oh, okay, I'm writing this code and all these things are happening back there, but you do need to sometimes see into that. So one of our main topics today was observability. So who wants to lead us off on that? Matt, do you have any thoughts on observability?
Yeah, so I think this is very relevant. Let's make quite a good segue here to what we were just talking about, which is that looking at the way that observability is evolving into 2024, kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of these closed down abstractions, and I say that in a good way, that we're offering to developers these days. So, yeah, I mean, just throwing back to what we were saying about the infra from code stuff, it's yet another thing where we're moving towards greater abstraction. We're having alleged magic. I know this is a podcast, so you can't see my air quotes going on in the background. So from alleged magic actually happening so that the likes of you, Laura, can just get on with stuff. And I think there's quite an interesting emergence of techniques and also a maturity of them where those sort of things are okay. Because you've got the developer's dream, which is, well, I just want to write my code, which is, I think, honestly, any platform team should be trying to provide that for developers. And you want developers to be able to write their code, get on with it, have a paved road, whether it's through something like Amped or whatever platform thing that you've got, Venue, Backstage, etc., providing all that for you. And then, well, actually, if we're providing all of this stuff for you as a platform, cloud infrastructure, developer experience, etc., then why the hell aren't we doing the observability as well? Observability is as a thing is kind of seems to be evolving into 3 or 4 different areas now. You've got logging, monitoring of system resources, you've got monitoring of application, and then probably some APM, some application performance monitoring stuff going on there. We could be doing all this as code, I think.
I would love that. Like we were just like saying infra from code. We are saying security from code. I would love that one. And dashboards from code. Like I would love to just magically have this beautiful Grafana dashboard that just shows me everything without ever having done it myself. So yeah.
So you're scaring people because they're like, well, no, but we need to check this. Laura, we can't possibly have you developing your code and then just deploying it out on your own. No, what if it goes wrong? Folks, these are solved problems, aren't they, right? Even the security stuff, it's like we talk about DevSecOps and getting people to shift left and codify all of the things, involve developers in conversations earlier. Involve security people in conversations earlier. Maybe that's why it didn't happen. I get that wrong all the time. Yes, let's codify that. We can put in the right firewall rules, the right security groups, etc. Apologies for the AWS leaning terminology. Compliance. Maybe we're doing something with that actually involves transfer of money, and we need to log various things. That's all codifiable, if codifiable is a word. So yeah, should we get on with it?
And I think platforms are already getting there, right? I mean, platforms like New Relic, I have seen blogs about observability as code, and anything as code is a good thing. So because it comes with all the advantages that something as code provides you, putting them in Git repositories, the scalability of this, since how you can have consistency across platforms, version control, all of that. So I don't think there is a question about is observability as code is a bad thing. And again, observability, working with different customers, we have seen over the last couple of years, every big customer wants to have more monitoring, not less monitoring. And it's been a challenge as well, because then you see this, alert fatigue. There were so many statistics that we have come across, like, for example, businesses with more than 10,000 employees, 56% said, they chase more than 1,000 alerts a day. Can you imagine, how many alerts are we getting? How exactly we should be dealing with this, what we call the alert fatigue? So should we talk about that as well? I mean, observability is a good thing, but how much of it is a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, you've reminded me there, Jobin, of a situation that I was involved in, but just for once, not the ultimate mistake maker, where I was part of building a system which was fully automated using Puppet, and we put in some automation using a tool called Sensu, which probably everyone has forgotten about. Yes, some blank looks on the call. And I think we managed to send just over 1,300 text messages to the CTO's mobile phone in one evening. That was 2016, though. And we get the same sort of responses to, like, we can automate this for monitoring things as we did then. And because of that, the thinking has moved on. We can get us 2 steps ahead before we start making mistakes like that, and avoiding that alert fatigue. It's like, we can figure out what we need to monitor in advance. We can also figure out, in a sort of postmodern retro style, what a alert storm would look like and what alert fatigue would look like. You can use software these days, I won't mention any names, that will do things like dampen alerts at a certain time and dampen groups of alerts so that you don't get this absolute torrent of stuff. I think it also combines with some of the stuff you need to do to get a good developer experience anyway, which is to give people good guidelines, to give developers good guidelines of what good alerts look like. And also to keep them on the straight and narrow with things like logging standards. So if you're going to be logging stuff off to a system that alerts based on various patterns, then don't just let every bit of debug logging enter into that stream. And from there, you can kind of work on getting some good postmodern observability going on. How does that sound?
Yeah, well, I think so. I kind of rip on that a little bit more, Matt, because one of the things that you see a lot, like in like post-incident reviews and retrospective and things, is like, oh, we needed to be monitoring this, or we need an alarm on that metric, or whatever it is. We never take them away. We're really scared of like removing them and actually having it an acceptable thing to go, like, actually that alarm is not useful anymore, or or those things. Like it's almost like you should have a 1 in 1 out policy for like alarms on things, so you don't get this like crazy kind of storms of things.
It's like tests. It's like, oh, let's add more tests and let's have hundreds of tests. And oh, by the way, ops folk, why does my build take like 3 hours? Maybe we should.
I mean, I don't take it kindly that you're pointing fingers at developers here. I mean, obviously, there are so many debug logs that we put into the code. I agree. But at the same time, there is this complex infrastructure systems, the complexity of cloud native systems, so many different services on AWS or GCP or Azure we are using. Every single thing is sending alerts. Right? It's not just the code, the alerts coming from the code. Every single service that you're using, there is monitoring involved. They are sending alerts as well. And how many of these are we handling? And a lot of them is false alerts. Yeah, you're right. I mean, developers send a few false alerts as well, but infrastructure do as well, right?
I think the observability thing is it's only as useful as it is. Like, you can observe everything, or you can observe what's really useful. Like, we're working on a plugin that we maintain that we're trying to create like an audit log for at the moment. And so we're trying to decide like what is exactly useful for this, because we don't want to slow down everything. We don't want to overload everybody. We want to be able to use the information as it's useful. And I think that the evaluation when you add something new to say, well, is there anything I could take away? Like that's a very good kind of in my own life, I'm a little bit of a minimalist. That's a kind of minimalist approach to coding and data. Instead of being like, give me all the data, it's like, well, let me think about what exactly I need here.
What you said is actually a data-driven approach that most companies are now doing. A lot of these platforms, they actually take the data, see which ones actually make sense. Like John was earlier saying about, hey, does this metric even make sense anymore, right? Should we take this alert out because it's not applicable anymore? And I think artificial intelligence can play a big part in this. And I'm sure Matt will love this, but because, humans cannot in any way go through 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 alerts and figure out which one is more important and which one we should keep. So I think that's one area where AI could substantially help us, and figure out which alerts should be important, which ultimately what text message I should be sending to the CTO's mobile phone, right? That has to be decided by probably computers, not humans.
And it's nuanced, isn't it, Jovin? Because so Laura mentioned audit logs a few minutes ago. And so you've got this dichotomy of things, because there are some things that you want to be minimalist about, because a lot of it is just noise. And you kind of know what they need to look like and what you're going to be looking for. But then there's other things on the other side of the coin, which are, well, actually, we might need to come back to this data in like 4 months' time for some audit reason or compliance reason or something. And keeping those two things very, very separate, I think is important. And I think there's a load more nuance in alerts as well on those lines.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I've seen some initial promising results out of Google Cloud, because in there sometimes I need to look for logs, and it seems like there's some smarts going on and like trying to surface the stuff that's actually meaningful to me. And I can only imagine that gets better. It's like we also need, your intelligence or meaning from code, and just ultimately we need a platform of everything that just does all the things. Yet it still is a balance between like handing it over to an AI and doing the thing as a human, and just that constant balance of hide the abstraction, or rather abstract the complexity or move the complexity. I guess that's just our career.
Yeah, and the AI thing, sorry, I am actually going to say something positive about AI. We're seeing that in observability platforms coming in, where, so I like to think of like doing post-mortem alerts things. So things like if a system goes down and then it always comes back like 8 minutes later, then maybe some piece of software could be intelligent enough to draw the dots there and work out what's actually going on there, or at least mitigate the alerts and put a note on it. That sort of stuff I think is starting to emerge into some of these observability platforms, and it's all a whole load of data crunching going on in the background on our behalf. So we start to see these patterns and trends. And yeah, if they're not using AI in the background, then I'll be very surprised. And that's a good thing.
It is.
So what else is up?
A bunch of us are going to be in Vegas at Team 24, the Atlassian's big conference, and we've got a big booth there. We're doing loads of lightning talks. I'll be doing one on DevOps, another one on AI, and there's plenty of other people talking about some really interesting things. And it's going to be a really good conference. So if you're there, come and say hi. I'd love to meet you.
And I guess I can say that here on April 23rd, I will be at the Shift conference in Miami with a few other people. I think we both have some Adaptavist people. We're doing some menu stuff there. It should be fun.
And we wanted to mention that on April 25th, Rasmus, Matt, and myself will be hosting the Expert Hour Live on Adaptavist LinkedIn. And we will have a special guest from GitLab, Bart Zhang. We'll be discussing transformation for the curious. So come join us and hang out there live. For Jobin, Matt, Rasmus, John, and myself, this has been DevOps Decrypted. Thanks, guys.